Hey everybody, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Aubrey Sampson.
And I'm Davey Blackburn, and it is so great to have you guys joining us this week on the Nothing is Wasted podcast.
Yes, we love having
Aubrey,
you.
It feels like this is the theme over the past several weeks and weeks to come, that there are multiple voices that are doing interviews.
All these Nothing
that are
is
doing
Wasted.
Like, we're hosting this.
Faces, I love it.
This is exciting.
Yes, exciting.
This is exciting for me because you know that at the beginning of this ministry, we did not want to just make this about the Blackburns and our story.
Yep.
It's like, this is about, this is part of, guys, pain is the common denominator of life. It touches all of us.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the leveling,
Yep.
right? And the equalizer for all of us. And there's so many amazing stories and so many incredible voices who are experiencing God in the midst of their pain and have something to say about that. That's going to help us. That's going to help us to tune into who God is and how he leads us through the valley of the shadow of death. So this is just so much fun for me to we were talking about this before, Aubrey, and I was like, man, okay, Jessica, who did that? And you're like, oh yeah, I interviewed her. I was like, oh yeah, okay. So last Strawn, Eric interviewed him. And I'm going, man, I don't even know. I don't know what's going on around here. This is amazing.
So good. That's like such a good place to be as a leader. And I do remember, I don't know if our listeners will particularly remember this, but I feel like it was last year, Davey, that we all began kind of praying that like the roots of Nothing is Wasted would not only grow deeper, but like the connectedness with other ministries would grow stronger. And I feel like God is just doing that because people like Eric and people like Vinitha and other voices that have come alongside Nothing is Wasted are making all of those roots more connected and greater. And then the kingdom is more impacted. And you're right. It's everybody who's here has a pain story. And yet God has met them in it. And so I think that's it's beautiful to see what God's doing here and Nothing is Wasted.
It's really cool to be a part of something bigger than yourself,
that's it.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
And that's what I would like. If there's a transferable principle to you as the listener of what we're talking about here, is tether yourself to something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, that's good, Davey.
Right, like something that's not just your own. We say this often, that we're not the point of this whole thing. But God invites us to play a part. And so we get to be a part of this kingdom thing that's so much bigger. And I think that transcends to, churches. And it's like, let's be players in the kingdom and watch what God does, because I think we can go so much further and impact so many more people together than we can all by ourselves.
So good.
So I'm off that soapbox.
Right.
It's really fun to be a part of that.
Yeah, it's really fun to see. Well, I did, like you said, get to interview Jessica Harris. This is a sensitive conversation. So, we like to just tell people sometimes, if you're listening with kiddos, this is one of those ones that's got some adult content, because part of Jessica's story is she was exposed to pornography at age 13. And really it became a major stronghold in her life. And we can talk about this, Davey, perhaps later. But one of the lies that really, I think, has been spoken over this conversation is this is not something women deal with. This is only something that guys deal with. And because of that lie, Jessica sort of hid in her stronghold and in her addiction, and it really took over her life in some unexpected and horrific ways. Thankfully, as you'll hear her story, God met her powerfully. But we'll listen to that in just a minute. I would really encourage you to. It's such a good story, listeners. So I know you'll be excited about it, even though it's a hard one to listen to. Before we dive into our conversation with Jessica, though, we want to invite you to do something. If you're looking for your next step here at Nothing is Wasted, we would love to invite you to go to nothingiswasted.com/start here. Davey does these free live calls with 5 steps to taking back your story. That's something we're very passionate about here at Nothing is Wasted. Do you want to say anything more about that, Davey?
Yeah, it's just God has really shown up in profound ways in those calls. It's not a webinar.
Yeah.
It's not like we're like, okay, hey, we're just going to kind of teach some stuff and you guys get some little tidbits. We actually, I see your face and you see if you want to, and you see my face, and and then we have some Q&A at the end, and inevitably, God's showing up, and there's maybe this isn't going to make you want to show up, but there's tears and it feels like God's healing people in that moment while we're on that call. And so, we've always wanted to make sure that we are ministering to you personally, and that no matter the reach that Nothing is Wasted Ministries has, there's a very relational, personal touch. Because that was the ministry of Jesus, was as he walked around. And so for everybody, right? For like Aubrey, we try to embed that into our entire team. I think about when we were at ARC conference back in April, and what we walked away from was, oh my goodness, we're there with a booth, but we're like ministering to and praying with
hurting
pastors
people
and church leaders there who are hurting. And that was like that was the thing we were spilling over with in excitement and joy, because it was like, it felt like a healing environment right there. And that's really what we want to invite you into, because we feel like that every single person, God has healing for every single person. And that may look different than what you expected, but he wants to show up in your story. Good. And so that's what we're here for.
So go to nothingiswasted.com/start here to take your first step. All right. With that, let's go ahead and take a listen to my conversation with Jessica Harris. Well, hey, Jessica Harris, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. So glad that you're with us today.
I am happy to be here today. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so we were, before we went quote on air, you and I were laughing about how I had a neighbor come in and a kid I had to shove downstairs, and you've got a baby asleep and your husband had to take kids out. So this is what women do. I just need our audience to know this is what it takes for women to be on the podcast together. So thank you, Jessica, for taking all that time to be with us and making it happen. I know you have a powerful story. And so I'm just going to open with a big open-ended question. Jessica, tell us about yourself and tell us your story.
Yeah. So my name is Jessica, obviously, and I grew up in the church. And so my big, I guess, meeting point is that I run the blog Beggar's Daughter. And Beggar's Daughter is a website designed to communicate the truth of God's grace to women who struggle with sexual sin. And I am passionate about that because it's my story. I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Christian home. But I was exposed to pornography when I was 13. And this is back in the day when it took us forever to get online.
Yeah, right.
when it was dial up and we had floppy disks and Oregon Trail was like the game to play.
You
way
look
back
a lot younger than me, but yes, girl, yes.
Well, thank you. So I was exposed, and it was back when the internet was basically new, right? We didn't really understand the dangers of having this access in our homes. And I don't think people realized that there was even pornography out there. Way back in that day, pornography was still Playboy kind of thing.
Yeah,
and,
right.
So I was exposed to pornography in that context. And in church, it was right in the middle of all the true love weight stuff and all the purity rings. And so the only conversations that we really had about sex were don't talk about sex.
Yes, right.
So I'm exposed to pornography in this and just going, oh, this is the big secret that everyone's trying to keep from us. Now I understand.
Wow.
And so in my mind, as a 13-year-old Christian girl, it just seemed like, oh, this is a perfectly acceptable alternative to what all of those heathens out there are doing. All of those other people are out there sleeping together, but this is safe because it's not involving anybody else. I'm not going to get pregnant. I'm not going to, none of
I'm not going to get diseases.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
It's totally safe. This is healthy. This is good.
Wow, Jessica.
Because I didn't have any messages telling me
it wasn't
otherwise, right? There was no messaging really around healthy sexuality or what that looks like, except to just say don't do it.
Don't have sex.
Wow. And I wasn't.
So you're good.
So I'm good. So I struggled with pornography for years. By the time I graduated from high school, I would say that I was full on addicted. It consumed my life.
Wow.
And I looked for help. I tried to break free on my own. And I couldn't. I was trying to motivate myself to stop. I would try to limit how long I spent online, and that didn't work. I would beat myself up like physically trying to get myself to stop, and that didn't work. And so I went looking for help when I was 17, and everything out there was for men.
Yeah. Whoa.
And I thought, oh, this isn't normal for women to, this isn't a normal thing for women to look at. Am I the only woman in the world who's done this? And so that started this journey of shame for me, really, because I hadn't really felt shame necessarily before that. But now that I'm going, oh, this isn't something that everyone does and that's just healthy and like that people just do for fun, this is something I'm stuck in and there's no way for me to get out. And that started a journey of shame for me. And eventually I found freedom, and I'm happy to talk about it. But that's part of the reason why I share my story.
Wow,
and I started my blog in 2009 and have been sharing my story and talking to women who had that struggle, just trying to change the conversation, especially in the church, from this is what men do to like, this is just a human problem. Right? Like this is just what anyone can struggle with.
And I want to come back to that because I've been in ministry for a long time, and the amount of girls and young women that come to me and say this is a struggle for them, and then the added shame because it's not normalized that women struggle with this too. So I want to come back to that. And we'll be sure to put links to your blog and everything, Jessica, Beggar's daughter, on our social. But let me ask you a question about, you said you went from like feeling like, hey, this is pretty safe, to beating yourself up because you were like trying to stop yourself. At what point did you go, maybe this isn't safe, or I want to stop this? Or like, at what point did you realize it was having a little bit of some damaging or just more power than you wanted it to have?
Yeah. So that was during my senior year. So I was on track to be valedictorian in my high school class. Like I'm one of those people that can just like sleep on their textbooks and pass the class. So
many people are jealous of you for that.
Right. So I had no problem. Like I had gotten straight A's for as long as I can remember. And so that to me was like a huge goal in my mind, right? Like I am going to have arrived once I am top of my class, and I was going to go into a career in medicine and all kinds of stuff. So my senior year of high school, though, because my use was so prolific, so I was coming home from school, calling my mom, because this is dial-up. And for those of you that don't like know how dial-up works, like if you were on the internet, you couldn't use the phone. You couldn't be on the phone
at the same time, right?
So I would call my mom at work, figure out when she was going to be done, and then tell her like, hey, just so you know, I'll be researching for school all afternoon. Well, I don't need to research for school for hours, right? Yeah. That's not what I do. So I would make a note of when she said she was going to be done. And I would just spend that entire time from when I got home from school to when she said she was going to be home looking at pornography online. Wow. And then when she said she was going to be home, I would, a few minutes before that, I would stop. I would clear the history. I would type in some websites that looked
like research for school, or
like
something?
Research, exactly.
Wow,
and then I would close down the thing. Well, that was just the afternoon. Then after my mom went to bed, I would, because the computer was in her room, I didn't have access to it, so I would go out into our living room to our TV. Well, back in the day, when you didn't get a channel on TV, you could still kind of sort of watch it. Like there would be, it would be staticky, but sometimes scenes would like pop through. And so I found the adult channels on the TV. And so after my mom had gone to bed, I would go out and I would turn on the TV and I would go to the adult channels that we did not get, obviously. Yeah. And I would just sit there for hours watching a snowstorm and static, just waiting for little scenes to slip through on the TV. When I was finally exhausted, I would be sure to change the channel back to the where it had been. So there's all this sneaking and like covering up and like, and then I would go to bed for however many, like 2 hours that was left before I had to get up to go to school. Well, my grades started to be harder to keep because I was just so exhausted. Yeah. And that's when I was like, okay, maybe this is a little out of control. Like maybe this has gotten a little out of hand and let me try to cut it back. And so at first it was like, let me just dial this back a bit. maybe instead of 8 hours a day, I'll cut it down to 4.
Yeah.
And even that felt
Wow.
impossible. Like
Wow.
it was like, I can't control this. I can't stop this. Like, even when I'm going, not today, like, I'm just going to skip today. We're just going to take a break today. It's not going to happen. It was like I would get up and my body was just like, we are doing this today, whether you like it or not. And you're coming along. And so
wow.
I just found journal pages actually the other day from later on in my journey as I was like struggling to find freedom. But where I'm saying in my journal, I write that I worked so hard to get that website to work. I was actually arguing out loud with myself as I'm trying to get the website to work. Like, it was just this battle, you know?
Yeah,
and
almost
I'm going,
like it had like
help.
divided you in a sense. Like you
Right.
weren't this like holistic, integrated
Exactly.
person because of that.
Yeah.
Wow. As you, like adult Jessica, looks back on 13-year-old Jessica through high school, you know, struggling that way, 2 questions are popping in my head. Feel free to just run with whatever stands out to you, Jessica. But one, like, how was she formed because of that? But then I think too, like, what do you wish you could, like, if you could like step in and like speak over her, like, what do you think you would be saying?
Man, so I think I feel like they kind of feed into each other. Both of those questions do. Because I literally just thought about this the other day when I was looking through a box and found 2 pages ripped out of my journal. I was like, why do I still have these?
Yeah. Wow.
But like, if I could go back to 13-year-old me, I would definitely let her know that her like sense of belonging and acceptance and even beauty like does not come from this.
Yeah.
And that like what you think you're missing out on when it comes to like abstaining from sex is not met in pornography at all.
Wow.
And that this is not a healthy outlet for it. It's
Wow.
not going to teach you good things. And I do spend time on my blog just writing about how my decisions have continued to affect me. And I'm not damaged, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but there are still effects that can happen of like, oh, that has its root in pornography, like that lie or that thing that I believe. For instance, I've had 3 children in the span of 5 years. So my body is not the same as it was 5 years ago. Right. And I would have never told you when I was a teenager, I could never say, oh, I have body image issues, because as a teenager, I believed I looked like a porn star.
Whoa.
And so I was good to go. Like, I didn't have self-image issues because in my mind, I was that attractive and I was that.
Yeah.
Like,
wow.
I met that standard. And even when I was first speaking and sharing my story, I had a woman come up to me and she said, you know, you're beautiful. And she said, you totally could have been a porn star. Like, I'm not, this is a pastor's conference. I'm not exactly sure that that's like the best compliment, but it was that mentality of like, of course I'm fine. I don't have body image issues. Like, I'm gorgeous. And then I had kids and I did start to struggle with body image issues. And I said, where did these come from? And I realized it's because I no longer looked like a porn star.
Wow.
And so it's like, I do still have these lingering kind of effects that I have to still work through. But that's what it can do. It can just reshape how you view sex. It can reshape how you view relationships. It can reshape how you view your own body. Like, it can reshape a lot of things that are very important.
Yes.
And that take a long time to kind of work through.
So I do want to get back to that working through peace and what the Lord has been doing in your journey. But before we do that, let's go back to this conversation about like women and porn, because I do feel like it is a major, well, I think we've done a disservice to young girls and women, but it just feels like a major cultural lie, both in the church and without the church, that like this is a man's struggle. Those books that we've had on Nothing Is Wasted, Stephen Arterburn, like very prolific author in early Christendom in the like 90s and early 2000s, Every Man's Battle. And I guess the question is, that caused shame for you. I know that have caused shame for a lot of women I've ministered to. Talk to me about that. I'm just going to leave that open-ended.
Yeah.
Like, what's the problem with the fact that we said this was a male issue only?
Right. So the problem, and there's so many different things I can talk about this. But the problem with it is when you go, this is a man's issue, then you're not explaining to women why they struggle with it. You're leaving them with a choice of like, so does that make me a messed up woman? Like, does that make me like, when I was in college, when I first went to college and I got caught, their response was, we know this wasn't you. Women just don't have this problem. And so like, it was like, well, I do have this problem.
Like,
so now I'm very confused.
Yeah.
Like, so what does this mean about me as a person? Like what's wrong with my wiring and what's flawed? And so that's why the message is so, like, that's why it can be so damaging, but its roots are honest enough. Like, I really feel like it wasn't, people don't say men have this problem just to make women feel bad about themselves, right? We get this messaging because back when pornography like first started, keep in mind it's been a thing for millennia, right? Like it's not like a new thing that we just came up with, but back like in the 50s when Playboy came out, or things, Hustler and those sorts of still image magazine printed pornography, or even like the silent films in the movie theaters, like back in that era, who had access to the money and who had the freedom of movement outside of the home? It was the men.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you're a business person and you're developing a product, you're looking to see who has access to it, and you're going to market it to them. So when pornography first started, it was marketed to men because men were the ones with the access to it. You're not going to find a 1950s housewife, sneaking into the store to buy, it would be too difficult for a woman in that era to get out and do stuff. That's not to say that women from that time don't struggle, but when it first started, or when all of that kicked off, it was marketed to men. Well, then you're talking like 40 years later, the church finally starts to talk about it. And that's, in the church's eyes, it's like, oh, men have been doing this. Now let's figure out why. Why do men struggle with this? Oh, well, it's because men are visually wired. And like, in an effort to, I think, encourage Christian men to believe that there's grace and some sort of reasoning for why they're stuck in this, we made this male-centric message of like, well, men, you struggle with this because God made you this way, men. And what we failed to realize is that once pornography was accessible to women, women would also access it. Like, and that doesn't fit in that narrative.
No,
and so
it absolutely doesn't.
What you have to do is you have to change the narrative, right? And men don't struggle with pornography because they're visually wired.
Right.
Like, that's actually disproven with science.
Like say that again, Jessica. Like, preach to the people in the back. You know what I mean? Like, I just say that. I hear that message all the time, and I just think it is it's such.
It's not like, okay, like women are also visually wired. Let me tell you what, if a guy walks by me without a shirt on, or that pastor wears the right suit, like,
you
so
recognize
women
that
can do that too, right? So it's not like a men exclusive thing. And women, I actually saw some material back from maybe 20 years ago talking about pornography use among Christians. And someone had even said, like, now we're seeing that women are being rewired by culture to be, and it's no. Like, back it up. Like, God wired us this way, right? And pornography is just preying on that. And so we have to change the whole message to, like, men don't have a reason that's exclusive to them for why they're struggling with pornography. They just struggle with it more because it's been more accessible to them
and accessible to them
for longer. And now that it has been opened up to women for decades now, we're seeing where it's like slowly risen in use to the point where we have teenage girls now who are just becoming pornography and they think it's cool. Like that's the way that this has escalated, where it's gone from my mom's generation, where it's like unheard of really for a woman to struggle, to my generation where the internet kind of came in halfway through and messed everybody up, to today's teenagers and college students who have grown up with tech and they've grown up with their friends using this stuff. I mean, I spoke at a church like 10 years ago, and there was a 12-year-old girl there. So 10 years ago, and she was 12. And she was like, why is this woman even here sharing her story? Like, what's the point? Every girl watches porn.
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
And that was 10 years ago. So we have to start like changing the conversation, because what churches aren't prepared for, I don't think, is like the tidal wave of women who are struggling that's going to hit them. You know, they're walking around still going, well, men struggle with this because men are visually wired and women read romance novels.
Right.
And they're going to get hit with this wall of women who actually watch real porn, and they're not going to know what to do because there's no spot.
Right about that. You're so right about that. Oh, I'm so glad your voice is in this space for that reason. Let's go back to your story. At some point, I know you became a victim of somebody else's pornography. Like you became commodified and objectified. Are you comfortable talking about that? We don't have to go there if you don't want to, but okay.
No, we can go there.
Okay.
So when I was 17, and I want people like keep in mind, like I grew up in the church, right? Like I am Christian, and after I graduated from high school, I feel like I really started my walk with the Lord, even while like battling this struggle. Like, okay, God, well, you know what? You love me anyway. Let's figure this out. And so I went off to college, a Christian liberal arts school. And that's where I got caught. And my use had escalated to the point that I was using pornography on our school provided desktop computer.
Wow.
In our dorm room with my roommate asleep on the bunk. Like I could reach back and touch the bunk bed. That's how bad it had gotten. And she would go study in the library because I was always on our computer, and she would sleep with a mask on because I was always on the computer and it was always keeping her up. And so I would be on it all night. And what I would do is I would open like a word processing document, and I would put the internet browser like down in the bottom corner of the computer. So if she looked, it looked like I was working on a paper. Yeah. But the video's down here in the corner. So that's how I did that. Well, I get caught because I didn't realize that they were monitoring the internet usage there.
At the school. Wow.
And they said, that's the dean who said, we know this wasn't you. Women just don't have this problem. And I wasn't given an opportunity to say, actually, yes, that would have been me. So I walked back to my dorm room after that conversation, and I thought, I give up. Like, I can't keep living that double life, right? That like the perfect on the outside, but struggling so much on the inside. Yeah. Like I'm done. And if I can't be the good Christian girl who used to struggle with pornography, then I don't have a choice but to be the porn star who used to be a Christian. Like I needed to own one or the other, right?
Wow.
So I went back to my dorm room, 17, and just started an online relationship with a guy through, I think it was AOL Instant Messenger, to be honest with you. like we just started chatting all the time because I knew better than to go back onto any websites.
Because you could get caught for real this time or whatever. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Like,
but your workaround was messaging.
Yes, because that wasn't tracked at the school. They could tell you were in a chat room or you had it open, but they couldn't see what you were saying or didn't monitor what you were saying at least. Okay. So at one point in this conversation, and I was only at the school for a semester, so this is all happening very quickly from like September to December is this timeline of getting caught and then getting into this relationship with this guy online. I gave him everything. I gave him my real name. I gave him access to my school's intranet. So I gave him my sign-in information so he could see that I was real and that all my stuff. He said he was a college student from like a couple states over. But now that I do what I do, I look back at 17-year-old me and I want to like smack her upside the head.
Like, girl,
what are you doing? But he did. He was like, oh, you're so cute. You're so beautiful. And then he's like, can you send me pictures? And so this is 2003. This is before there weren't even cell phones at that point. It was like webcam stuff. And I was 17, grew up in the church, and I wanted that acceptance so much. And I wanted to be so done with playing the games and pretending and hiding from people. Like I just wanted to be known, right? And nobody knew me. Like even my family, they knew what I wanted them to know, but they didn't know what I was struggling with. And so this was like the first person in the world who knew who I was and what I struggled with. Cause I like told him like, I'm like, this is what I'm into. This is what I watch or whatever. And so he knew all of that. And so then he asked for pictures, and I thought, like, this is it. This is my future. Like, this is what I'm reduced to almost. And so I gave him his pictures, and he responded back like, God, you're beautiful. And in that moment, like, I would have done anything for him. Like, he could have been like, come and meet me in some scenic gas station like 5 miles down the road, and I would have been there. So, and I'm not stupid, right? I think sometimes people look at these stories of like these young girls that run off with these guys online, and they're like, what kind of idiot does that? Like, I was a 4.0 student, right? Like, I'm not an idiot. Like, it's just that world and those decisions can be so overwhelming and so intoxicating. And when I sent those pictures to him, I tell people it was like my personhood. So like who I am, my favorite colors, what I like to do, you know, my hobbies, like what it takes to get to know me, you know, were separated from my body. And I became a thing to him. Like, he didn't know any of that other stuff. Like, here I am doing this because I want to be known, right? I want him to know who I am. And then in doing it, he knew nothing. Like, I gave him everything, and he knew nothing.
Yeah, like, so, you were like, quote unquote seen, but you definitely weren't known, right?
We're not known.
And even seen, I mean, not in the way that your heart really longed to be.
Right. And then I look back and I go, he probably wasn't a college student from 2 states away.
Right.
And there's this part of me that just goes, wow. You know, we talk about in culture a lot about, you know, women owning their sexuality, and like, why can't they send pictures of themselves to whoever they want? That's, you know, that's them owning it. I don't own those pictures. Right.
Totally.
So here's me 20 years later looking back and going, there could be somebody out there with pictures of my 17-year-old body that I don't want them to have. Like, I lost control of my body. I lost control of that. And it still remains one of like the hardest regrets of my life. Of like, I wish I would have understand that it's not just a picture, right? Like, I wish I would have understood the deeper message that it communicated when you become like somebody else's pornography, when you commodify yourself for somebody else.
It is interesting to me to hear you talk, Jessica. I mean, my heart hurts for you, for younger you, for sure. Just like woman to woman, I just feel that. But also, I think you're exactly right about the cultural messaging that says it is empowering to do whatever, send pictures of your body, post pictures, share that. That's empowering. That's feminism. And what you're literally saying is, no, it's actually disempowering. Like, I disintegrated myself. I commodified myself. And you were doing it out of like wanting love and belonging. And there were things your heart was longing for, but like, that's not empowering. And the way that the enemy, I think, has twisted that cultural message to like convince women that is empowering. You're here to say like, no, like that was something was stolen from you. Like, the enemy stole something from you.
Right. It's devastating. And I wish people understood that. And I shared my story, and that specific part of my story, like, that's not typically like, normally my story is like talking about how women struggle with pornography. And I don't necessarily go into like the sexting part of what I struggled with. But I spoke at a teen conference, and I decided to share that part of my story. And
Jessica,
I had a girl come up to me afterwards, and she handed me a little note with her story written out on it, and she's just bawling. And she said, I sent nudes to my boyfriend. So this is a Christian conference, right? These are youth group girls, right?
Yeah. And you saying this is like, my mama heart is like, oh. Anyway, go ahead.
So
these are good girls.
She says, right. She said, I sent pictures to my boyfriend, and then he broke up with me. And then to get back at him, so she's getting back at him. I sent them to his 2 best friends.
Oh gosh.
And I flipped the paper over, and it said, I feel so lost, across the back. And I just wish people understood how, like, tangled up your heart and head get when you're in that space. Because I feel like it's so easy for people out here to kind of sit and talk at it. You know?
Yeah, right. Totally.
Like, you should know better, and you were raised in the church, and you should know better, but you weren't in her heart, and you weren't in her body. Like, you weren't there to understand the desperation or the gravity of what she was doing. And you can sit there and talk at them until you're blue in the face, but till you try to understand where they are, you're not going to make an impact or help them. Like, this is something that can be completely devastating. And so even, chirping at them afterwards isn't exactly helpful either.
Absolutely not.
You got to walk them through. It's a healing journey.
Yes,
really.
that's it.
It's exploitation, and it might not be by the boyfriend. Yeah, sure, she gave him willingly, but she's been exploited by the enemy, like you said.
She has been.
Right.
And I also, first of all, I just want to pause and say thank you for beginning to share that second part of your story, because it's so vulnerable, Jessica, but also the healing that the Lord is going to bring through that you're just even talking about. Thank you for that. I also, going back to our conversation about, I just think men have been centered, or young boys have been centered in this conversation. And so to begin to center the women and the young girls, their pain, this young girl's pain in that, I think is so important for us to have a full understanding of what's going on here. Okay, so Jessica, so you're giving away these photos. You're in this online relationship. At some point, God steps in. Like, tell us, just kind of narrate us through a little bit more of your story from that point.
Right. So I left college to go home for winter break in December, obviously. And then back to the land of like slow dial-up. So it wasn't as easy to be in that kind of contact with this gentleman as it was at school, where we kind of had faster internet. Definitely nowhere near as fast as it is now. But I went home, and my mom actually lost her job while I was home on break, or right before I came home on break. And I had already determined that I wasn't going to be a doctor anymore. I had given up on that. And I was going to be I had no choice but to be a porn star. Like, I had just convinced myself that that was the only way out for me. And
that was like the only path forward for you.
Right. The only one that made me feel like I would be able to be at peace with myself. Right. So like, I could be done pretending, everyone would know, and I didn't have to keep the act up anymore.
Whoa.
So I realized that it probably wasn't fair to my now unemployed mother and my mom was a single mom at that time. My parents were divorced. And so I realized it probably wasn't fair to her to keep going to school at a, $20,000 a semester college, under the guise of becoming a doctor, when I figured all I was going to end up doing was, being a porn star. So I quit. Yeah. I dropped out of school like while I was home on break.
Wow.
And we went back and got all my stuff. And then I came back and I started trying to figure out how do you get into the porn industry? Like,
now,
I have
did your
no
mom
idea.
know here's why I quit school? Or okay. See?
No.
So even though you're like, here's my authentic self, you're still hiding it. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So I quit school for my mom's sake, according to, how I told my mom. Like, obviously she doesn't have the money. We don't have the money as a family. I'm not going to do this to you. Okay. So
this is
how convenient that God gave me how convenient that God gave me a way out. So I'm looking for ways to apply online, and thank goodness it's not as easy as like applying to the mall to work at Sears.
Praise God.
I had no idea how you got into it, and it turns out you get into it by being like exploited and taken advantage of by wicked and horrible people. But whatever. So I was. That did not happen. And 6 months after I left school, actually an old friend of mine from elementary school was killed in a car accident. And I went to her memorial service, and the memorial service was complete. It was in a big church, completely packed out. And I remember the pastor standing at the front and saying, and I think she was 22 or 23 at the time. He said, some people live their whole lives trying to impress other people and get other people to love them. And he says, then we have to practically pay people to come to their funeral because they've like made no impact whatsoever. And he says, and then here's Darcy, was her name. He says, all she did was love Jesus and loved other people. And the walls of this room cannot contain the lives that she touched.
Wow.
And I sat there and I was like, that's what I want. Like, I want to make a difference. I don't
Whoa.
want people to like love it. Like, it's not like I want people to love and accept me. Like, I want to make a difference. I want to matter, you know? Like, I want my life to matter.
Yeah.
And it's not going to matter if I'm a porn star, right? Like, I want to make a difference. I want to make an impact. And so I went forward then during an altar call. And I was raised Baptist, so we do altar calls all the time.
Yeah,
So,
I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church too, so I remember those altar calls.
everything's
girl.
an altar call.
Yep.
So I went forward and I was like, all right, God, listen, I have no idea how you're going to do it, but I want you to make me like Darcy. Like, if you can use my life in that way, like, I will give you this messed up, banged up, beat up life. Like, and you can figure out how to do it.
Wow.
So that's kind of how I, as they call it, like, surrendered my life. And then I ended up going off to Bible college that fall.
So just to reiterate, you're in medical school essentially. You're on your way to medical school.
Right, yeah.
And then you dropped out. This friend passed away. At her funeral, God came to you, and now you're in Bible college.
Exactly. Because my thought was, okay, I'm going to go to Bible, or I'm still going to go back to medical school, but I won't go to like the expensive Christian schools. I'll just go to like the cheap other ones.
Okay.
And so to get my good biblical foundation, I'll go to Bible college first. And so I go to Bible college and I kind of tell God, all right, listen, here's the deal. Like, have you ever made a deal with God? Like, here's the deal. I'm going to go to Bible college, but you have to understand something. Like, this porn thing kind of comes with me. Like, I've tried to get rid of it. I've tried to make it go away. It's just kind of stuck. Like, it's just part of who I am.
It's just here. Yeah.
It's here, you know, and some of the messaging at the time was like, oh yeah, all kinds of pastors are struggling with pornography. All kinds of missionaries are struggling with pornography. Like, you can use people that struggle with this. Like, I don't.
And struggle with
Right.
yeah. Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I went off to Bible college. Like, God, you can do whatever you want to with my life, but this comes with me. And it was there at Bible college that one of the dean staff, they had like an all women's meeting. Like, all of the girls on campus were mandated to come to this. And so they talk about strongholds, and the dean says, like, the idea of a stronghold is like, it's an area of your life where the devil still has a fortress, right? And so you might have victory in so many other places, but if the devil still has like a tiny little castle, you know, on your turf, there's a weakness there, right? And there's an ability to kind of like keep like chipping away at you. And so, it was like, do you feel like your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling? I'm like, yes, I do. You know, do you feel like you're just not growing in your walk with God? Yes, I do. Like, tell me what the answer is. And it was like, well, there's, you know, it's probably a stronghold in your life.
Wow.
And the dean got up there and said, we know some of you struggle with pornography and masturbation. This is a room full of Christian women.
Come on.
And we're going to help you. We want to help you.
Come on.
And it's like the air left the room. Because I think like half the women were like, oh, that's me. And the other half were like,
what did you say? You know? How dare you? Yeah. Right. They're like clutching their pearls. But the other women are like, finally, somebody said it.
Exactly. And so they encouraged us, like, whatever our stronghold was, to share it with members of the dean staff kind of above us, like RAs or. And I remember being so angry at that moment, right? Like, I was like, God, this isn't fair that this is my story. I call it Christian Barbie's story. Like, I want Christian Barbie, because Christian Barbie's story is like, well, I just don't read my Bible enough. Like, that's her stronghold.
Right.
Like,
That
why
is
am
like
I the one?
her big struggle.
Right. I don't pray for 45 minutes a day. And then I'm like, I'm over here like, well, I'm going to actually say that I struggle with pornography. And these poor women are going to be flipping through their little papers.
Right.
And they're going to get to mine and go,
what do we do? Yeah. Wow, Jessica.
So I remember just being so frustrated. Like, I want to write down anything else, like any other Christian answer. But it was like, God said, listen, like, you've wanted a chance to like be known and to have this conversation. And they've literally had half of it for you. All you have to do is like, say that's me.
You named me. Yeah. Wow.
Right. And so I did. And I handed in I rolled the little papers up like into teeny tiny little scrolls. And I like handed them to the two women I was supposed to hand them to, crying. And I'm like, please just read these later. And then I walked back to my dorm room thinking, like, that's it. I just blew it. Like, they're going to kick me out of school.
Wow.
It's over. It's done. And I remember just praying, like, God, this has to work. Like, if this doesn't work, I've been caught and that didn't do any good. If I confess and there's no answer, there's no hope, there's no grace, then I'm done. Like what else is there to do? So the member of Dean's staff came to my dorm room later that night and knocked on the door, and I thought, here we go. Like, I'm packing my bags, I'm going home.
Yeah.
And she said, Jessica, what you wrote on that paper was brave, and we're going to help you. And I remember thinking brave is the last adjective I would use to describe what was on that paper, you know? And I tell people in that moment, it's like I had been walking around with like this ball and chain of like, you can never tell anybody this because you'll never be free. You'll never be able to break out of this. You'll never be able to shake this. And in that moment, when this woman looks at me and says like, hey, what you wrote on that paper was brave. It's like I could turn around and figuratively like look the devil in the face and say, you're a liar.
Yeah. I was literally just thinking about all the lies. Yeah.
All the lies. And it was like, shame is a liar. And it was like, what else have you been lying to me about? Like there was like this, almost like this emboldenment of like, I am being freed, you know, like the ball and chain at one of the first sessions I ever taught, because I used to do workshops, and I had this like little construction paper, you know, Daisy Link chain, and I attached it to a black balloon and was walking around the front with this. And I said, when that happened, when my confession was met with that level of grace and even called brave, I reached back and I popped the balloon.
Amen.
It was like the first step in freedom for me. And that's why this conversation is so important, because there's so many women walking around with that ball and chain and they're not supposed to have it, right? It's not real. And we can help set them free when we meet that with grace. It
makes you think of, like, it's the Lord's kindness that leads to repentance, right? Like if that woman had come in and in any way, shape, or form judged you, critiqued you, punished you, the things you were prepared for, that would not have led to your freedom. But the fact that she spoke grace and life and truth over you.
Right.
Oh, so powerful. Jessica makes me.
And I think the same,
cry.
on that too, though, what I've found in the years that I've been doing this is men need that message too.
Right. That's right.
And I think, like, for so long, the message for men who struggle with this has kind of been like, get your act together and zip your pants up and knock it off. You know, and it has been like, and it's this like aggressive, you know, all of their stuff has like machine guns and knives and swords and tanks and airplanes. You know,
totally. It's like, we're going to like combat this like manly stuff with manliness. Yeah. Toxic
and then
manliness. Yeah.
Right. And then we talk about, you know, like you're feeding into the exploitation problem. Like that's somebody's daughter. Like what's wrong with you? And it's like this aggressive message of shame. And shame does not free anybody. Like it does not. Does not free anybody. So when I shared my story, like men have read my first book where I share my story in depth, and they've gone, like, this is a message that we all need. It's not just women. Like like men are hurting too. Like men are getting into this and being wounded by this and being changed by this. And when we just scream at them and tell them to knock it off, like it's not the heart of Jesus for them. Like it's a toxic messaging for them, and it also is like extremely harmful and not helpful for women. But we need to change the message for both, really, to help people find grace and freedom.
Yeah, it's so good, Jessica. So part of your story, obviously, when it comes to your own healing, your own redemption, your own freedom, is that you've taken what God has done in your life, and you've got Beggar's Daughter, this work that you do around this topic. Can you, I don't want you to fast forward too fast, but like from you beginning to experience the freedom and grace of God over your pornography addiction and over the shame you were carrying and over the lies, to Beggar's Daughter, like paint that picture for us.
Right. So I left Bible college, graduated Bible college, like, all right, off to medical school we go. And obviously I'm not a doctor, just in case, spoiler, I'll just fast forward to the end. Not a doctor.
Not a doctor.
Not a doctor. So I'm like, okay, we're going to go to medical school. And it just felt like all of the doors were just closing. And I remember being so frustrated, like, all right, God, listen, Like, what's the deal? You know, I did my thing. I did my 2 years of Bible college. Like, I've done my time. Like, give me my medical degree. And my white picket fence. And I want the white picket fence. I want the 4 kids. I want the cute husband. Like,
now
let's go.
It's a new Barbie you want. Now you want
That's right.
housemaker Barbie or homesteader Barbie or whatever.
So I was just like, let me just rewind and figure out what my real passions are, right? Because I think the whole science and medicine, I'm really good at it, and I still love it. It's a lot of fun for me. I love like watching the ER shows that are real and things like that. But Grey's Anatomy is not going to cut it for me. But but the real ones are fun. But it was like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, what am I passionate about? And while I was at Bible college, I actually discovered that I loved writing. Go figure. I never liked English classes in high school. So it was like writing, like where'd that come from?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, well, I really like writing, but like, I don't know. I wouldn't want to be an editor or a journalist. Like, what would I even write about?
Yeah.
And it was like, you're going to share your story. And I said, absolutely not. Under no circumstances is that going to happen. Spoiler alert, it did. So I wrestled God with that for probably like 2 years and just really tried to apply to every college and program I could think of to get away from it. And
did you really?
I call it my Jonah. I did. I did. I even like, I tried to apply to teach English in China.
Come
like,
on.
I'm not even lying.
That is your Jonah. Like, you're like, nope.
I will
run
go
the opposite direction.
Absolutely anywhere. Like, send me to the underground church. Like, send me to somewhere where I could like be I will do that. Do not make me do this. And so I finally just felt like like a bit like a toddler. I have 2 of them now, so I see it. But like, I'm not gonna like, fine, I'll do what you're asking me to, but it's like, I'm not happy about it.
Yeah.
So I started my website completely anonymously, right? And like, no one needs this. This is stupid. Like, so dumb. But now that I do this, now I'm going to get my, husband and my picket fence and my kids. So here we go. So I start my website completely anonymous and share my story, and people start emailing the website. And somebody emailed and asked if I would come and speak to their youth group.
Whoa.
And I was like, oh snap, because you can be an anonymous writer, but you
can't be an anonymous speaker.
Nope. So I went and I spoke at this youth group, and I was like, okay, we can just keep this kind of on the DL. Like, we don't need to, it's still not a big deal. Like, it was a purity talk. It wasn't like me really sharing my stories. Like, okay. And then I somehow got linked up with this like big name. He is a big name now. He wasn't back then, but a big name speaker in the Catholic circles. And he's like, hey, when I speak about pornography to the guys, why don't you come along with me and speak to the ladies? I'm not Catholic. And I was like, are you sure you want to do this?
Right.
And he's like, yeah, it'll be great. And so we like do this little stint where we're doing events together. And one of them was a college retreat in Canada. And it's just like a year and a half after I started my blog. I am not intending to make a life out of this. Like, I'm still like, God, okay, just let me know when I can go off to med school, or let me know when the husband's coming. Like, for me, this is like a waiting room, right? It's like, just tell me when I can leave. Like, please let me know when I can leave. And I go to this women's conference, or this college conference in Canada, and I was leading the women's workshop. And I mean, you would know this, how many women's workshops are like about true beauty and like dating and da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
And so I come rocking in, and I'm like, we're talking about lust. So when I get there, people hadn't even looked because they just figured it was like one of the normal ones.
the normal.
And so when they meet me, I'm like, yeah, we're talking about lust. It's like, what? Oh, well, in that case, I know. So I go to do this workshop, and the room that they had put me in was completely full. Every chair was taken. Women were sitting on the floor and standing around the corner of the room.
Whoa.
And so I give my presentation. That's actually the one where I did the ball and chain. And I walk out of the room as they're in like small groups confessing their strongholds to each other and praying for each other. And I walk out of the room, and I was like, I am not Beth Moore. Like, I am not, I am no one knows who I am. Like, I've done this for a year and a half, and I don't want anyone to know who I am. So no one does. And so they did not come for me. They didn't come to see me. Like, they came for this message. And it was like, in that moment, I call that my Esther moment, where like, it was like God said, you can go and you can have the
Yeah.
life that you want. Like, go for it. You want to go do medical school, you want to go do that,
Yeah.
you'll be great at it.
Yeah.
You know, like, have fun.
Yeah.
But
And God's love would go with you, and like,
right,
you know,
like he's not
yeah.
going to abandon me
Right,
to this.
right.
But it was like, and in Esther, like when Esther is saying like, this is what the king's like, this is what's going to happen. And Mordecai's like, don't you even dare. Like everyone tries to make it all inspirational, but it's a confrontation. Like he confronts her and he says, don't you even think for a minute that your silence is going to save you. Like God's going to send deliverance from somewhere and you won't be saved. Like you won't be spared. And so I had this feeling of like, God saying, yeah, sure, you can have that life that you want. You want to take the exit door? There it is. You know, like just shut your website down and be done. But look, like this message is needed and there are women there who need it. And I had this moment of, I know what that's like. And I know what that's like to sit through church event after church event after church event and not hear anybody talk about where I am.
Wow, Jessica.
I know that they're there and I know how to get them out. I can't leave them there. Like I can't leave them. And how can I walk away knowing that they need help and knowing that there's nobody else out there talking about it. And so I was like, all right, I have no idea how this is going to look, but here we go. And so here we are over a decade later. And it was not easy. There was a lot of banging on doors and rattling cages. And when I first started to try to get this message into churches and things like that, or magazines, or podcasts weren't really a thing back then, but the overall response was like, nah, women don't really need this. And so Beggar's Daughter kind of changed from trying to confront the church, because the church was not ready for that, to just talking to the women who struggle. And so really ministering to them. And over the years, we've seen the conversation changing where churches are asking for resources because they're starting to see those women come to their offices and ask for help. So it's been an amazing journey. It's definitely hard, and it's not one that I signed up for exactly, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like no real anointing is born without that like pressing, right? And so I feel like just like the difference between you pursuing a platform and you stewarding a message, and like you are stewarding such a message that God has given you, and it's such a painful one, but I think of all the freedom and all the healing, all the belonging, all the goodness, all the flourishing, all the freedom on the other side of your yes, and on the other side of God's faithfulness to you, Jessica. I'm so grateful that you reluctantly said yes. Yeah. Oh man. Let me, if you don't mind, Jessica, let me ask you one more question. I wish I could talk to you for hours. I'm just very sensitive right now to our listeners who are struggling specifically with pornography addiction. We could talk about this addiction in general, but I actually think you're here with this message, quote, Esther, or for such a time as this. What words I know you're not a pastor necessarily, but I think you are in so many ways. Can you pastor our listeners who are just like, man, Jessica's story is my story, or hits so close to my story, and they're carrying this thing alone? Like what's a word for them?
I would, like, I look back at those journal pages, right? Like, and look at 17-year-old me who is just feeling so stuck and so wanting freedom. And like the first journal page that I tore out was like day one of a Bible study of freedom I was doing. And it's day one is always the best. Like January 1st, you're always up early and in the gym and eating right? Like that's just how it works. And so like day one, I'm like, Jesus is the living water, which is like actually ironically like the message of my book that I just wrote. But like, Jesus is the living water. Like that was day one of my Bible study. And I had it all figured out. I'm like, I've been going to pornography for all the wrong reasons. Like I had it all, I had figured this thing out, and I had my list of guidelines. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to have my computer here. I'm not going to be on, like I had all of these rules that were going to protect me and keep me, help me break free. Right. Yeah. Week later. So the next page is the next week. Day 2 of my Bible study. So I've obviously gone like a whole week to do the next day.
That's so real, right?
And that's where I'm talking about. I'm so mad at myself for getting on that website. Like I worked so hard to get that website to work. And like I I'm so mad at myself. I was literally arguing with myself out loud as I was doing it, crying, and now I'm mad and I'm like actually slapping myself, trying to like get myself to knock it off. And my heart breaks for that 17-year-old me, right? Because and I know that there are so many women who are in that exact spot. Like, I want to love Jesus so much, but man, I'm screwing this up so bad, and I want to quit. Yeah. And I think my encouragement would be, it's not always going to be this hard, right? Like when you are first trying to break free from something, when it makes sense that it's hard. And I think in Christian circles, we've been so, I guess, to borrow your phrase, like we haven't stewarded messages well. Yeah. And when we do testimony time, it's always like the cold turkey testimonies. Like, I came to know Jesus and boom, like Done! My whole life just like, and it's not realistic for so many people who are stuck in the trenches of this. And they're like, well, where's my magic Jesus moment? Like, am I not doing this right? Like, am I not loving God hard enough? Did I not pray the prayer the right way? Did I not read my Bible long enough? Like, what is the deal? Like, why am I not getting that, Right. And I think it's so important for women to realize in this that you are not only fighting a battle for like purity and like your heart and your mind, but like your body, like there's a physiological aspect of this too that has to heal. Yes. And that's not an excuse like for you to stay stuck in it, but it's help you understand that there are underlying things that have to happen, and that this is a hard journey, and it is okay for it to be hard. Like, there was a point in my journey where I almost like went through withdrawal. Like I was like trembling, like after so many, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks of no pornography and no masturbation, none of that stuff. I was like hurting, like my body just hurt, and I was like, what on earth? And I don't know why I knew this, but I was like, this reminds me of like those people that go through withdrawal from drugs.
That's what I was just thinking. That's addiction withdrawal, right? Wow.
Yes. And I did not realize it was a thing until I shared it like as part of my story, and I had other women go, "Oh my goodness, I did the same. Like the same thing happened to me." But like, we're not talking about this kind of stuff. Just like, we make it sound like if you just love Jesus hard enough, poof, it all just goes away. Totally. And it doesn't. It's a process, and so it's not always going to be as hard as it is in the beginning. And and don't give up, and be willing to see the little victories. And I know that's hard. It's hard when you've gone like a week and then you fall and you're like, I've screwed up, but you went a week.
Yeah. Like, celebrate that.
That's huge. Yeah. And God is working in you, and as you turn around faster, and as you catch it sooner, and as you stop yourself sooner, like those are all proof of growth. And there will be a point, and this is, like, if I can say anything, there will be a point where it's not hanging over your life anymore. Like, I don't live my life every day in fear of pornography. Like, I don't live my life every morning like, okay, not today. Like, I don't even, other than the ministry that I do to women, and where I write about it, and where occasionally it'll pop up as like why do I feel that way about my body? Oh, it's probably because of that. Yeah. I don't, it's not a prevalent thought in my everyday. Like, I have, in God's grace and goodness, the life that I always wanted, that white picket fence and the babies and the stuff. And it was many years later than when I planned for it to happen. Yeah. And there was a healing journey that happened there, but man, you can get there. Like, and so if there's any hope that I can offer, is like, the beginning is super hard. Like, I didn't wake up one day and just poof, done with pornography. Yeah. Like, I woke up one day going, I've got this all figured out. And then woke up one day a week later and didn't have any of it figured out. And went through that for probably a couple years of this like back and forth. Oh, I made it 1 week. Oh, I made it 1 month. Oh, I made it 2 months. Oh, I screwed up for a whole week back to back, until I finally felt like, okay, I'm getting this. Like, I am finding freedom. And began to walk in it. And so it's okay for it to be hard. And God meets you in that hard, right? Like, he doesn't expect you to get through it on yourself. He's walking through it with you.
That's right. Oh, Jessica, thank you so much for sharing so much of your story and what God's done in you. Where can our listeners find your books, find your resources, find Beggar's Daughter, follow you, all of that good, fun stuff?
All that stuff. Everything is Beggar's Daughter. So, except for the book. The book is Quenched. So my first book is Beggar's Daughter. My second book that just released in January is Quenched. But you can find everything at beggarsdaughter.com.
Awesome. And we'll certainly share all of that on our socials as well. Jess, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Well, I told you that was a good one, didn't I, Davey? Powerful, right?
Wow. Yeah. Really a crazy story of God's rescue plan for us.
Oh.
Right? Intersecting us in a, when we decide to go our own way and to give in to, the allure, but then also layered on top of it, the shame and and we just, and we get buried under that saying, okay, I don't know if there is another path for me. And we just dive into it, and then God comes in and rescues. What a powerful...
Isn't it powerful? I mean, the fact that she was like 17
idea.
years old, attending a Christian college, and like deciding to become an adult film star.
Yeah.
And that the Lord stepped in that way, I think is really... I mean, you're right. I hadn't, honestly, until just now you saying that, David, I hadn't thought a bit about the Lord's like great rescue plan in her life, but that's exactly what happened. Like God literally like saved her from a totally different life she could have lived.
Well, and a lot of times his rescue plan in our life is exposing what's going on in our life.
Totally.
And so it can look initially like my world is crumbled. It is completely been upended, and yet it's like, well, this is God's mercy because this is a pivotal critical juncture where he's stopping you from heading down. There's a way that seems right to man, is what Scripture says, but in the end it leads to death. And so God's kindness is to go, okay, I'm going to expose this. Because we're his kids, right? If we are and he disciplines those he loves, those he considers sons and daughters. So sometimes it's hard to see that, though.
Yeah, totally. And it's vulnerable, right? Because it means your secrets are out. Like my secrets are out then. But at the end of the day, this literally was the difference between like life and death, and a life of imprisonment to adult film and to pornography and to all the things of trafficking, all the things that go with it. And now she's in ministry, like helping set other women free. So one of the things that I know that this is relatable to a lot of our listeners. I know it's not relatable to all of our listeners, but I think what we can all connect with is the shame there. So powerful when Jessica just said, like, shame is a liar. And the fact that the shame, the chains of shame, like, kept her so heavy. But eventually when she began to, like, be able to speak against that and see that, that's when, like, healing happened for her. And interesting to me that there was the shame for her of the like usage and addiction to pornography, shame of this relationship she had online with that guy, but then on top of that, this double layer of shame because like as a young girl she wasn't quote this wasn't supposed to be her struggle. This is a guy's struggle. This isn't. So it's like the way the enemy like layered shame upon shame upon shame. Man, the enemy's tactics are strong.
Yeah, he really is. And I think what's important, one, we're seeing this to be increasingly prevalent, both with men and women, because of the access that, it's everything is so readily accessible right there in our fingertips. And that wasn't the case 20, 25 years ago. It's a different, so it feels like that pull and that tug and the enemy's snares are so much stronger because of that. And so I say that from a cautionary standpoint. I also say that from a standpoint of like inviting people to freedom, to not hide behind this place of like, nobody's going to understand because nobody's dealing with this. It doesn't matter who you are or what place you are in life or what your gender is. The enemy wants this to stay covered.
Yeah, that's it.
And he wants it to stay hidden, but I mean, just like what Jessica found, if you could find people, safe people, right, to be able to disclose this to them and to get out from underneath that heavy weight of shame. And that's what's on, I'll say this as well. what's really important is that when you're somebody who is that safe
Yeah.
person, how important it is to continue to be that safe
Yes.
person and be mindful of your response.
That's so
or
good.
what you
Say
say
more
in
about that,
terms of,
Davey.
well, shame is one of those things that, like, it's almost like, I don't know, the first thought that came to my mind was like a turtle kind of poking his head out to see if something's safe. And the moment there's like oh, it's not safe, they're
Yeah.
going to recoil and
Yeah.
jump back in. And so with this, especially, scripture even distinguishes sexual sin in terms of, this is sin against your
Right.
own body
Right.
too, right? So it distinguishes it, puts it aside from, or, not necessarily greater than
Right,
any other
right.
sin, but
It
like
categorizes
it says, okay,
it.
there's some elements of this that becomes more complicated. And I think it is because of that shame element that's so prevalent with it. And so now it's so tangled up together that when you are someone who, if someone comes and confesses to you, your response is going to determine whether they continue to feel that shame
Yeah.
or whether they walk in. I don't want to say the pressure's on you to walk, that they walk in
Right,
freedom, but
right.
I'm going to say you're going to be able to be an instrumental player
Yeah.
in them walking in freedom. Most people that I hear about who are entangled in addiction, they would say the same thing that Jessica said. They would say there was this instrumental group, this instrumental person right here
Yeah.
that became a safe place for me to disclose this when I thought nobody else would understand, nobody else would. And now all of a sudden that shame it's come to light, and so the shame no longer has power over
That's
me.
exactly right.
And that's the stronghold that I think the enemy really wants us to get bound up by, is this stronghold of shame. So that's how we can become healing people for others as well.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And I think that I was telling you before we were recording, like I speak at a lot of events, and the amount of women and girls that have confessed to me that this is their struggle. I think you're exactly right, Davey. Like we're saying that so that listeners, maybe this is something you struggle with, or someone that does, you're not alone. Like, you're not weird.
Right.
You're not,
Right.
now I do believe God wants to set you free. And I do believe this
Yes.
doesn't have to be your reality, but I also,
Right.
we don't want the enemy to keep those addictions, those pornographies, those attachments to the wrong things in the dark, because that is where they thrive. But shame cannot
Right.
exist in the light. And
That's wow.
so yeah, if you can
There's-
find that safe person to talk to, and like you said, be the safe person. Don't freak
Yes.
out when somebody comes and tells you that. Don't be like, how dare you? Like, take
Right.
it in stride. Yeah.
I think there's two ditches that the enemy can cause us to fall into when it comes to addiction, especially when it comes to shame-filled addiction. And the one ditch is that we can begin to go, oh, this is so commonplace, this is so normal that it's not a big deal.
Oh, that's
and so we
good.
can give ourselves to like license, right? It's like, oh yeah, everybody's
Yeah,
doing
so
this.
it's not a
fine.
big deal.
It's fine. It is what right. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Or we can, wow, this is such a big deal that I can't tell anybody about this. Nobody will understand. And then now we are bound under shame. And so we've got to steer clear of those two ditches and know that that's the enemy's tactics in this. We're going to have a propensity toward one or
That's
the other.
good, Davey.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. That's really good. Well, we know that you appreciated Jessica's vulnerability. She's got a ministry called Beggar's Daughter that she mentioned. Be sure to follow her. And especially if this is something you're struggling with, Jessica would be a safe person for you to reach out to. We also would love to invite you to take your next step here at Nothing is Wasted. If you've been around, you've been listening maybe to the podcast, or you've come in through another door, Instagram, something like that, and just sort of wondering, like, hey, I want more resources for this thing that I'm struggling with. I want more resources in my own pain story. We would love to invite you to go to nothingiswasted.com/start here. Pretty simple. Nothingiswasted.com/start here. That's basically to sign up for a free live call with Davey. It's like 5 steps, very simple ways to take back your story and get connected with the work and the ministry of Nothing is Wasted.
Yep, we do that Zoom call regularly. It's wonderful. I mean, it's for anybody who's going, all right, what's my next step? What do I need? Or if you're new and you're just trying to figure out, okay, how do I get started on this journey? That's what that call is there for. Invite other people. If you've been on it, I know there's a lot of people who invite people as well. So nothingiswasted.com/start here. We'd also like to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. You can download or stream his music anywhere music can be downloaded and streamed. We'd love to encourage you to follow us on Instagram at Nothing Is Wasted Ministries. Follow me at Davey Blackburn. Follow Aubrey at ObSam. Aubrey, I want to ask you about this. At this point, when people are listening to this, your new book has released.
Oh wait, when is this?
By this point,
is it? Will it have been?
I believe so. Right?
October 17th is when the kids' book comes out. Are we still
let's
little?
See here. Hold on.
A little ahead of the game here.
I love. Oh, we are a little ahead of the game. So pre-orders.
I am. Thank you for bringing this up. I
don't know why I thought this was in September that it was releasing.
It's not. We're
October 17th.
October 17th.
So pre-orders.
Big Feelings Days. Please pre-order it. Your wife has
we just got it in the mail.
Yes, which is very exciting. She sent me some pictures
so cool
reading it to your kiddos, and very excited. It's a book about hard things, heavy emotions, and Jesus's love for little ones. The little ones that you're walking with who have big feelings. So be sure to check that out. Thanks, Davey.
Oh, absolutely.
Love.
Absolutely.
Hey, next up we have a conversation with Tim Timberlake.
Yes.
Don't know if he's of those Timberlakes or not.
He probably wears some Timberlakes.
Yeah, he probably does wear some Timberlakes.
Dude's got some swag, that's for sure. I got to have this interview.
You did this.
I got to.
Okay.
You guys finally let me take another interview over here.
We'll let you keep your job, I suppose. We'll let you. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a listen to part of Davey's conversation with Pastor Tim Timberlake.
I stopped really looking at it as a loss and start looking at it as congratulations. They have gotten their crown. They have gotten their heavenly and righteous reward. And what an honor and a privilege it was to just be in their presence and enjoy the gift of who they were while they were here on earth. And so, in hindsight and reflecting on that, the more that I really process it from that viewpoint, the more I see the benefits of going through what I went through, the pain that I went through, and the struggle that I went through. And, it's all a defining mechanism that can utilize its greatness and extract greatness out of us if we allow it to. That there is no king, there is no queen that's positioned until another king or another queen transitions. And so I think for us to have an opportunity to step up and into a position that only comes when it's passed on to us. Number one, it's honoring. Number two, it's putting us in a position to reflect those that have gone before us. And number three, it shows us the faithfulness of God, because although it is an end to a life for someone, it's not an ending for everyone.
Right.
And so for those of us that are still here, I think we have to learn how to glean the goodness, how to glean the joy, how to glean the happiness out of life, because that's what our loved ones would want for us. And so that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to stay in the lane and in the vein of who I believe my Father will want me to be, and most importantly, who Jesus has called me to be. And I know that he's celebrating that in heaven.
I love that perspective, Tim, because that's the perspective that we have to carry us through this, right? Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing Is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.